President Trump's long trip to Asia now in the home stretch with a final stop in the Philippines for a controversial meeting with that country's president. I'm Rick Leventhal. This is the Fox Report. President Trump in Manila now for formal talks with Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte, a leader who has drawn international condemnation for sanctioning a bloody drug war in his country. Trump sharing a handshake with Duterte earlier, and they'll hold bilateral meetings at the ASEAN Summit, an annual gathering of leaders from East and Southeast Asian countries, in the next hour. Meanwhile, the rhetoric between the U.S. and North Korea took an unexpected turn last night with President Trump jabbing at Pyongyang's leader, Kim Jong-un, on Twitter. The president tweeting, "Why would Kim Jong-un insult me by calling me old when I would never call him short and fat? Oh, well, I try so hard to be his friend, and maybe someday that'll happen." Chief White House correspondent John Roberts joins me from Manila in the Philippines with more. John, there had to be some eye-rolling and some pretty dramatic reactions to that tweet in the Far East.
You know, there are always reactions to almost everything that the president tweets. And good morning to you, Rick, from Manila, where it's 8 o'clock in the morning. The president begins his day at the opening of the ASEAN conference. In about an hour's time, North Korea will be top of the agenda when the president talks with the leaders of 10 Southeast Asian nations, as well as meets with the prime ministers of Australia and India. It will also be, as you mentioned, his first sit-down bilateral meeting with the controversial president of the Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte. Duterte's administration has presided over the extrajudicial killings of thousands of drug dealers and drug abusers, and Duterte making no apology for it. In fact, not long ago, Duterte said that there are 3 million drug addicts in the Philippines, and he would be happy to, quote, slaughter them. He also has claimed as recently as Friday to have killed people himself, and you'll remember a year ago, he infamously called President Obama a, quote, son of a whore for daring to question his record on human rights. And he took another aim at President Obama on the sidelines of last week's APEC conference in Da Nang, Vietnam, calling him, quote, black and arrogant. None of that expected to come up in the president's bilateral meeting with Duterte, because the president really wants to focus on North Korea, also wants to focus on trade. And, of course, the problem with China building military installations on the Spratly Islands in the South China Sea, which literally is just a few miles away from where we are standing now. Peter Cayetano, who is the Foreign Affairs Secretary for the Philippines, talked to Fox News yesterday. He believes that the Philippines will have a much better relationship with the United States under the Trump administration than they did under the Obama administration. Listen here.
It's a relationship. Relationships are complicated. But you cannot view the relationship in one blow. For example, our military-to-military ties, very strong. Cooperation, very strong. So if there was a misunderstanding with the previous administration, there were words that were misinterpreted because of the distance, because of the different culture, I think it's been repaired now.
So President Trump has got a difficult needle to thread here. I mean, he needs Duterte's support for those big issues like North Korea and the South China Sea and trade. But, you know, these extrajudicial killings and human rights abuses, Rick, they are another big issue as well. So we'll see how the president handles that when we get the readout from that meeting later on today.
And, John, last night at this time, we were talking about some of the controversy surrounding the president's remarks aboard Air Force One, and you got some clarification over the president's discussions with Vladimir Putin, right?
Yeah, you'll remember that controversy erupted yesterday, Rick, a little earlier than this time, when the president said aboard Air Force One that Vladimir Putin had again assured him that he didn't meddle in the U.S. election. The president, when asked if he believed him, said, "I really believe that when he tells me that, he means it." That was taken back home initially, that the president believed Vladimir Putin. But we sought some clarification from him last night at a press conference that he had with President Quang of Vietnam in Hanoi at the presidential palace. I put the question to the president, can you clear this up once and for all? Do you believe or not believe President Putin when he says that neither he nor Russia meddled in the U.S. election? Let's listen to what the president said.
What I said there is that I believe he believes that, and that's very important for somebody to believe. I believe that he feels that he and Russia did not meddle in the election. As to whether I believe it or not, I'm with our agencies, especially as currently constituted with their leadership.
But aboard Air Force One, the president also disparaged the former leaders of the intelligence community, James Comey, James Clapper, and James Brennan, which brought a very sharp reaction from Brennan earlier this morning. Listen to this.
Well, I think Mr. Putin is very clever in terms of playing to Mr. Trump's interest in being flattered. And also, I think Mr. Trump is, for whatever reason, either intimidated by Mr. Putin, afraid of what he could do or what might come out as a result of these investigations. So it's very worrisome, and I think it sends a worrisome, very disturbing signal to our allies and partners who are concerned about Russian interference in their democratic processes as well.
And Rick, the president actually called me yesterday morning to talk a little bit more about his meetings with President Putin. And he told me that they met on the sidelines of the APEC conference, at cross-meeting tables, things like that, only very briefly. And he didn't want to spend that entire time arguing about whether or not Russia meddled in the election, because there were other important issues like what to do about Syria, what to do about North Korea that he needed to talk about. So he basically said that he listened to what Putin said and then moved on to other issues.
You know,
Rick?
John, I was just going to ask you if the White House, and I guess President Trump himself, is disappointed that so much attention is being focused on these words about Putin when he's covered so much ground during this trip to Asia.
Well, part of the problem, though, is, Rick, is that, you know, the wound was a little bit self-inflicted. You know, that the president, I don't know if he just feels like if he says that he doesn't believe Putin, it's calling Putin a liar, and then that's going to ruin the relationship that he's trying to build with Russia, you know, cooperation on Syria, North Korea, and other issues. But the president could easily put this away if he just said, look, I believe what our intelligence officials said. I believe what they've said, you know, for months and maybe even a couple of years now about all of this. And Putin can say what he wants. That's fine. I'm going to side with the intelligence community. Now let's move on to other things. But he always seems to hedge. So in some ways, this is a little bit of a self-inflicted wound.
We're going to have much more on that later this hour. John Roberts, thanks so much.